Okay, so this is where we left off. So we end up getting a new group of people moving in, a new culture called the Assyrians. And they come up from northern Iraq and they take over Mesopotamia from the Elamites. So here's a restored view of the citadel of Sargon II. It's from a place in Iraq, 721, 705 BCE. So the Assyrian kings were famous for being merciless to anyone who opposed them, but they were forgiving to those who submitted. And they were very warlike, and this meant that their palaces were heavily fortified. So as you can see here, there's a big wall around the palace to help protect it. And these palaces contained a lot of high relief sculptures and mural paintings. So we'll take a look at some of those here later. So this is a lamassu, a man-headed winged bull from the citadel of Sargon II. So from that citadel I just showed you, that palace I just showed you that was heavily fortified, this was from that. And it was actually guarded by this monstrous guardian. And there was more lamassus than just this one. It's, like I said, a man-headed winged bull. And they serve to kind of ward off the king's enemies. They're huge sculptures, 14 feet high, and as you can see, part of it is in the round, like the head, top of the head, and most of that is in the round. But on the sides, it's just a very high relief, and even down here. So there's a background that it's protruding from, so that means it's a relief. But it's kind of a mixture of in the round sculpture and relief sculpture. And so the front of this actually shows the lamassu from the front, so you can see two legs. And then on the side, it shows four legs. So in total, if you count these legs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the lamassu has 5 legs. So it's kind of just another representation of the fact that ancient artists were really just trying to show what they felt was the most complete picture. And it's an example of ancient artists using a conceptual picture instead of a realistic or optical representation. So they're really just trying to show it as clearly to the viewer as possible. They're not worried about realism, really. And that's why this thing has 5 legs. I mean, they're showing it very clearly from the side as having 4 legs. And then if you see it straight on, you see 2 legs. But if you're looking from this angle, you can see that it has 5, which is a little confusing. But so, and it's made out of limestone. So a lot of these palaces had these impressive relief sculptures. And this is an example of an Assyrian relief from the palace of Ashur-nabsir-pal II in modern-day Iraq. And it's definitely part of an extensive group. They're made of gypsum, and they originally were painted with really bright pigments. So this one actually shows Assyrians driving their enemies into the Euphrates River. So you can kind of see some of the water lines. And then these are the Assyrians, and then these are the enemies fleeing. I believe they're blowing up goat skins as kind of as inflation devices so they can get across the river and get back to their fortified castle thing here. But these are the Assyrians. And they're shooting at the enemy. And this is the fort, I guess. It's not very realistic. I mean, the fort seems to be floating on the water, but really the artist isn't concerned about realism once again. They're just really wanting to tell the story as clearly as possible. And the distances aren't really like correct. I mean, if you looked at this guy, he would never fit inside this door, or even these guys wouldn't fit inside the door. So it's definitely off a little bit. And then also the figures are showing that mix of frontal and profile views. So that's kind of something we've seen a lot of. So the next to rule ancient Mesopotamia were the Neo-Babylonian kings. And then after the Neo-Babylonians, the Persians came into power. These are some other examples of, let's see, other examples of Assyrian relief sculpture. So this was made by a Neo-Babylonian king, and he was able to restore Babylon to its former glory. Nebuchadnezzar, too, was the king that we're talking about. This is the Ishtar Gate. It's been restored. Babylon, Iraq, 575 BCE. It's in Berlin now. It was a mud brick city. It had these impressive gates that were blue glazed mud brick. It's 47 feet high and has been fully restored in this picture. Kind of has this arch-shaped opening flanked by towers, and they have some reliefs of animals. Some are made up, some are real, and some are composite creatures, I believe. And then each brick was glazed and molded separately, so it was a really time-consuming process. So in the next, culture to take over was Persia, and they captured Babylon. They also take Egypt as well. So Cyrus, who was the king of Persia at the time, he was a very powerful man with a strong army. He tried to take Greece, but he failed. But he was able to get Egypt and Babylon. So Persia takes over, and it really does boast one of the largest empires to date. So here's an aerial view of the palace at Persepolis in Iran. And it has all these columns. Now, when Alexander the Great came through, who was a Greek, he took over the Persians eventually. This is, years after this was built. But he ended up razing all this. Razing means destroying. So he destroyed this palace just to kind of show that, the Persians are gone and that he was now in charge. So that's why it's in such kind of bad shape. So this was a Persian ceremonial and administrative complex, and it was on a high plateau, and it was heavily fortified. And like I said, Alexander the Great later destroyed it, kind of symbolizing the destruction of the Persian power. And then the monumental gate that you enter through is called the Gate of All Lands, and that name kind of alludes to the harmony among the people of the vast Persian Empire. And it does boast 36 colossal columns made of stone. And a lot of them were topped with these animal protomes. Let me look and see what time it is. Oh, we still have time. So this is an animal protome, typically at the top of a column. It's basically the head, forelegs, and part of the body. And they're usually back to back, so I think we have like a goat here, or a ram, maybe. And it's back to back with each other here, and then they kind of support a beam and help support the roof of the structure, basically. So this is a column capital. Oh, these are bull protomes, with bull protomes from the Apadana of the palace of Darius II from Susa, Iran, 510 BCE, limestone. So the back-to-back animal protomes might have symbolized that the Persian Empire was in balance, and that these fearsome beasts are holding up the roof of this structure is pretty impressive, I guess. And it used a mixture of Greek, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian influences. So that's the thing about the Persians and the Persian art, is that there's so many different influences under the Persian art, because the Persian Empire is so large that they end up having influences in their art from all over, the world, basically. A lot of Greek, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian influences all mixed together. So here's a relief sculpture. Persians and Medes detail a processional frieze on the east side of the terrace of the Apadana of the palace. from Persepolis, Iran, 521 to 465 BCE. It's made of limestone. It's fairly large, 8 feet 4 inches high. And it shows kind of a procession of royal guards, Persian nobles, and representatives from all of the nations under Persian rule. So there was 23 nations in total. So this is just kind of a close-up of a section of it. And they're all bringing tribute to the Persian king. And this used to be brightly painted. So Persian relief is similar to Assyrian reliefs, but it does differ in style. Persian relief is a little more rounded. They project more from the background, so the relief is actually higher. And then the drapery folds echo a Greek influence. So you can really see that Greek influence in Persian art. So that's kind of a testimony to the exchange of ideas that was happening under the Persian Empire. And it's thought that artists from Egypt, Babylon, and Greece came to help decorate the complex at Persepolis. So, moving on, this is a rhyton in the form of a winged lion. Iran, 5th to 3rd century BCE. It's made out of gold. And this is an example of a Persian drinking vessel or conical pouring vessel, probably used for wine, and it's made out of gold, which is very rich. It's a animal protome, so the head, the fore, and then part of the side of the body. And it's a winged lion, so it's an example of a composite creature. So it's a very common convention throughout ancient Mesopotamian art, the fact that it has that composite creature. And the lip of it has a lotus pattern around it that has kind of a Greek influence. So it's got a lot of varied stylistic roots, basically. Let me see, and just make sure. Okay, still got some time. So after the Persians, well, actually, yeah, Alexander the Great, takes over the Persian Empire. So the Greeks take over, and then the Romans, and then some new rulers came in called the Sasanians. And so this is called the Triumph of Sapphire One over Valerian, who was a Roman general, I believe, or maybe an emperor. I'm not quite sure, maybe both. But this is from Bishapur, Iran, 260 CE. And this is Sapphire One, and he's a great general who was able to kind of extend the territory, and he actually captured the Roman Emperor Valerian. And this kind of shows that here, his amazing feat. It's called the Triumph of Sapphire One. And then this is the Palace of Khosrow One. This is in Iraq. And it shows the Iwan, or brick audience hall, covered by a vault. And then there's a series of vertical bands on the outside of the building. And yeah, so we've looked at a lot of examples of Mesopotamian art. This Arch Iwan is considered even an impressive engineering feat to this day. So I think that about wraps up this chapter. And yeah, we'll see you in the next lecture videos.